and welcome. I know this is a little bit delayed. We've had customers that have been like, oh, we want the results, And here we are finally, our 2022 BRZ, track season is upon us, tracks are opening up, we're getting excited, you guys are getting excited, and we left you hanging last time with how does the car perform with these headers. Friends at JDL made these available to us. We paid for them. This is not some sort of a sponsorship. We bought these. They are equal length headers, beautifully manufactured, and I wanted to see how these performed versus what we currently have and what we've shown you already on the car. So this video will cover two things. First of all, we're going to reveal what kind of silicone buildup we have in the oil pickup. I know that this has been covered by many online. We're going to be taking this car to the track, the time attack this year. We want to make sure that we're clear of any sort of debris in there, clean it up nicely, and put the oil pan back on. We're also going to be filling it with a slightly thicker oil for the track. We've got more track prep coming up that we'll take you guys through, but right after that, we're going to be putting in these new headers. We're going to be dropping the car on the dyno. We're going to be tuning it on the dyno, and we're going to see what is really the best header to run on this engine, and what makes more power, and where does it make that power. So without further ado, let's get this car up in the air and start taking things off. Now, what you're looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is our lovely Borla unequal length headers. So these guys are coming off, the oil pan's coming off, and we should be able to do this swap real quick. All right, so I got a new tool in the shop here. Haven't tried these before. They're an inductive nut buster. So apparently, if you got something that's seized, and we haven't had this header on long enough for it to really be seized or anything, but you know, I wanted to see how it works. So let's see if we're heating this nut up. Oh, this is hot. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, there you go. Headers side by side. We've got our Borlas on equal length of all the Subi rumble you ever want. Also, if you look in our previous videos, they've obviously done very well for power. And here are the equal length JDL headers. Now immediately you'll see the quality in the flanges here. The thickness of the flange is significantly better on the JDL. You'll notice that the Borlas have these flex pipes in there that allow it to have some flexibility in terms of expansion and contraction. These ones do not. These are obviously not coated. These are coated. You know, the opening of the pipe here, so we're looking at about just 40 millimeter on these, and these ones are a little bit misleading, 43 millimeters in the opening, but they do neck down significantly because down here, the OD of this pipe very, very close to 45 millimeter, and then the OD of this pipe is going to be right around 40. So 5 millimeter larger OD. The collector here, so this is 4 into 2 into 1. Everything collects here at the outlet, and these headers, they all have a single collector. So there's one collector here, a second collector here for these runners, and they're paired that way, and then finally they collect here. So obviously the JDL look like a higher quality unit, and I really hope that they perform that way. So what we're going to do next is we actually still have to drop the oil pan, which we're going to show you guys, and we're going to bolt up these headers, and then the dyno will not lie as we tune and try and extract as much performance as possible out of the new headers. Underneath our beloved BRZ, and I'm not a fan of what I saw in here, the entire pickup was essentially clogged. You guys can judge for yourselves, so you'll see before and after overlaid because we couldn't really shoot with this camera. But the tools that were needed to remove all the silicone were some picks such as these, sharp air, and a whole bunch of patience. Now this thing, for now at least, it's clear of silicone pieces. I honestly, this is an early build car, but I wasn't expecting it to be that clogged. I'm really glad I went through the pain of taking this off, and now obviously we have to clean it with a more sensible approach to re-gluing it. But wow, I'm certainly glad that I went and did this before taking this car on track and suffering an oil starvation issue. Subarus are known for some oiling problems, and we've only got, I think, about 3,000 miles on the car, and it was just full of silicone. This is just part of what we pulled out. There was a lot of very small pieces that were still in there that I had to blow out with air. As far as I know, there's no real reported failures, but it's only a matter of time. And why would you want your oil pickup clogged like that with silicone? That can't be good. I also heard the F824 DIT is affected in the WRX, so I'm sure we're going to have one of those development cars as well, as we work extensively with the WRXs and STIs. Anyways, it was a little bit of work. It was a few hours of taking this off. It's going to be a little bit while longer to really clean this up and redo the silicone properly in proper amounts on the oil pan. So now that we've pulled off the oil pan in order to clean all that silicone from the pickup tube, you can even see silicone actually inside the pan. So this is definitely a problem, and we want to clean all this up really, really well and reapply in a much better fashion. So two things that we need to do here. First of all, we need a way to clean this off, and we've got a scraping tool, but I think that there's a better way to chemically break this down, so we'll just show you that in a second. But also, we managed to put a couple of small cuts here into the oil pan as we were getting our tool in there to cut away the silicone. So we'll see how well this cleans up. It should be okay, but we'll see how it turns out once we're done. We may need to get a new pan, but it doesn't look too serious. First, we got to get the silicone off. So you're wondering, how are we going to get the silicone off? Well, we can, of course, you know, go at it with a scraper like this, but it takes a long time, and then we're going to put more gouging into this. And on top of that, of course, we have the silicone that is here on the block. If you look closely, it's got this sealing surface, but on both sides of the sealing surface, there's a lot of silicone. So we want to see if we can break this down. Now, I've done a little bit of research onto what's used to break down this RTV, and one of the things is gasoline. Another thing is WD-40 seems to break it down, and yet another thing that seems to break it down is this stuff, so lacquer thinner. And what I'm going to do is get some rags, cut them a little bit, put them all around this pan, and see if we can more easily scrape all this excessive goo right off and properly clean this pan. Okay, the moment of truth here. So we've been letting this thing soak for about 15 minutes, and we're gonna see now, once we pull this off, how much easier it is to remove the silicone. Ooh, this is already feeling a little bit better. All right, so here we are. We've done a lot of cleanup, and we finished this guy. So we actually had ended up bending it a little bit on this tab here, but we knocked it down with the help of a good shop just down the road. And we also knocked down and filed down a little bit of what happened here. You can see that there's a little bit of a cut that we made into it using our separator tool. So this is now salvageable. It's ready to go on. The silicone's been removed. We're going to do it one last spray of brake clean, and then we're going to use, so you could use the Subaru stuff for sure. There's also lots of options. We're going to be trying this particular sealant, and you guys are going to see that being applied tomorrow, because we're waiting for a baffle. And here, this is pretty much clean here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna go on the mating surface here and just give it a little sand with this 80 grit sandpaper. And then I'm also gonna use some brake clean on here just to give it a little bit more of a cleaning. And that's that. Then after that, we can get on with putting those headers and putting her all back together, continuing our track prep. So what we're going to do is we're going to be putting this baffle plate up in here, And what the baffle plate does is it prevents oil from the lower section of the pan under high G forces to slosh and go into the crankcase. So this should maintain more oil at the pickup, and it should prevent oil from getting splashed around, prevent that oil from riding up during track use, which this car will be subjected to. So we're gonna just install this little guy because everything is apart. You'll find this on our website as well, everything that we put on this car, and we test and validate if it is worth the mustard, as they say. This is a nice quality piece. I like the fact that it's just all metal with some louvers. This means that there's nothing that will really fall or break over time inside the oil pan. So we need to remove one bolt to put it in. You gotta be very careful here because you see there's a very little bit of play in the pickup tube, but it is actually bolted on the inside here. So if you do break it or damage it, you're gonna be taking this engine apart a lot more than it is now. So I just want to be careful when doing this. One thing that will seem a little bit unnatural is that this backside will get caught on your oil pickup, and you have to pull the oil pickup down a little bit, which can seem a little unnerving. It was for me, but now that it's gotten past that point, then it's obviously nicely in here, and you just have to locate the hole in the baffle and re-bolt this in. So now the idea here is to avoid doing what has already been done. What that means is avoiding the temptation to over RTV. And if we look at the mounting location, you can see that we can go on the outside of the bolt holes, but then the sealing lip here is just on the inner edge. Feels like I'm baking a cake. I think the oil pan is now prepared. I'm going to clean that surface one more time. You want your drain back washers nicely in place. The key is to not make a mess at this point because you've gone so far. Absolutely 100% oil free. Okay, it's looking good. So the now baffled oil pan with a clean pickup is now in place. Once you've got these torqued down, then you have to let this thing cure according to whatever RTV you're using, but then we're gonna let it cure for 24 hours. And in the meantime, we're going to bolt up those headers so that we're ready to go on the dyno once we fill it back up with oil and have everything wrapped up. So this is a little bit bigger of a job than expected, simply because of all the cleaning that had to be done, and it almost seems like a requirement on these cars. And if you look carefully here, when we applied the silicone, like there's no like massive squish bead that has just come outside. Okay, that's unnecessary. That's just a machine that has applied way too much. So you don't need a massive goop or layer that eventually breaks free, ends up in your oiling system. I'm going to go from the prescribed, it's on here, 0W20. We're going to run a more viscous oil that is going to be less likely to break down with the temperatures that we see on track, and that is this 5W30. It's a full synthetic, it's Castrol. I recommend going a little bit heavier on the oil when you're going to be tracking the car or subjecting it to sustained high temperature use. Ooh, just spot on. They're looking good. I think it's time to start it up. with no other changes to tuning and put the car on the dyno to see just what it'll do. Now what I was expecting to see is a whole bunch of top end gain, and I was definitely expecting to see the torque dip. So the torque dip is back. You can see that the unequal length headers really fill that in, the faint line. But you know what, I'm a little bit surprised. The top end is a little bit weaker than I expected, not really showing a major gain. So what we're gonna do now is going to be a little bit of tuning, and I'm gonna see if we can improve this torque dip, although I'm not 100% sure we're gonna be able to get rid of this entire thing. But I'm gonna see what we can do about the top end a little bit. Let's do a few more runs, and let's see if we can get these equal length headers to perform a little bit better, because just looking at this comparison right now, I don't know if we're gonna get there to make major gains, but we don't know until we try. So we're in the business of couldn't leave it alone. Actually, we're in the business of determining what makes sense, what makes the most performance, and we just had these JDL headers on the dyno on our Gen 2 BRZ, and the top end was just not where I expected it. It had a little bit of a torque dip. I mean, you guys will see that in all the results that we'll show you. But going back to our previous videos, we've tested these Tomei headers, which actually I pulled off for our Gen 1. And these Tomei headers, they are also, 4 into 2 into 1. You can see that the piping is smaller. You can see that the runners are shorter. They fit a little bit more compactly, but we had them. Let's test them out now with tuning. So I'm about to slap these Tomeis that are designed for a Gen 1 back on this car. We're gonna see whether or not they indeed will outperform these as an equal length header to equal length header comparison. Thankfully, it's really easy to put headers in. We won't bore you with the details. We're gonna slap these on. We're gonna jump back on the dyno. Done. So here we're going to basically take all that we've learned with all the dyno tuning and testing that we've done with the headers on this car and synthesize it for you and highlight some of the strengths and weaknesses of different headers on this particular platform. So what we're going to start with is the JDL headers. Now the JDL headers, they are an equal length design. You guys saw that. Let's look at some of the features here. So first of all, the top end looks pretty healthy just on its own, and then you've got this torque dip. Now we tuned out a big chunk of the torque dip, but it's still there to some extent. You can see that you just pull out of it and it's got this peak torque that's very characteristic of this and the 2-liter engine with these types of headers. Now this data on its own doesn't tell us much, so I'm going to start overlaying different power curves. You can see how many pulls we did on this car and how much learning we did in doing so. But let me just grab pull from the Borla unequal length headers. First of all, we didn't make any additional power with the equal length JDL headers up top. The slight difference here is just because it knocked a little bit, but otherwise same fuel, same setup, intake, the rest of the exhaust is the same with the motive mid-pipe and then the parent catback. You can see that there isn't much of a difference here, but there is a difference here where the Borla headers not only match these other headers in the mid-range and up top, but down low they fill in that torque gap a little bit better. So take that as you will. On this platform, on this particular car, it looks like those unequal length Borlas, not very pretty, not the super construction, but they seem to perform quite well and they sound good. Now let's add another header to the mix. So one other header that we swapped in is the Tomei equal length header, because I wanted to compare it with these other two. So the Tomei equal length header is this dotted line here. And what can we tell? Well, we can tell that up top there's basically nothing to choose between the two. Here the Tomei pulls just a little bit more in the top end. It's a little bit weaker, around 6,000, just past 6,000, and it's got a bigger torque hump here. As it enters the torque dip, it dips lower and then it rises a little bit quicker out of it. So that's what the Tomei dialed in on this car. The Tomei was originally designed for the 2.0, but it just gives you some perspective. So once again, the solid line, JDL, past this point, they're pretty much a wash, and where you're seeing the differences is how deep the Tomei goes into the torque dip. The JDL does a little bit better, and then the Borla is the best. And just because we didn't add enough lines to here, we had a customer bring in Ace headers. So his car had an exhaust. It didn't have a mid-pipe, but it had an exhaust. It had the Ace headers on there, and he had the charcoal filter removed from his intake. So I'm just gonna throw this up there as well, because it was really cool to dial in some Ace headers, and these headers were actually made again for the Gen 1. So we're gonna just drop in here. We can see that the Ace header is actually a little bit stronger in filling in the torque dip than the JDL. And up top, he is a little bit lower on performance there, but it's not the same car. So keep that in mind. He doesn't have the intake that we do, and then he doesn't have the exhaust, so he still has the OEM mid-pipe. So keep that in mind when comparing these two, but it looks like the Ace header does fill in that torque gap nicely. And let's just drop in the Borla headers once again on our car. So you can see that the Borla header, which is this dash line, fills in the torque gap about the same as the Ace header, and then up top, again, our car is just a little bit stronger than that customer car. However, they all perform kind of similarly up here, and then you're playing with this area a lot in terms of which header does best. So we tried to be as scientific as possible about this to help tease out the differences, to help you guys make the best choice. We tune all of these headers, and we can tune whatever setup you guys have on your car. Now we have plenty of experience with several headers, some equal length, some unequal length, and overall it responds a little bit different than the Gen 1. The car makes great power, lots of fun to drive in any configuration. If I were to choose, and what I'm choosing to leave on this car, on our car, is going to be the Borla headers, because they fill in the gap, the torque gap nicely, and there's no penalty in running that unequal length header in the top end. And on top of that, I like the sound. Hopefully this gives you guys some insight. Keep following this build. There's more to come. And yeah, a lot of information all at once. Enjoy. We'll see you on the next one.